The Nowata Methodist Church is happy to produce a lot of different content for the edification of Christ's church throughout the world. This daily segment that you're listening to right now corresponds with the Daily Bible Reading Challenge, which is hosted by Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. If you want to download the list of readings that they publish for yourself or learn more about this challenge, this initiative, go to biblereading.christkirk.com. I'm Jeffrey Rickman. I'm the pastor here in Nowata, and I read from the Berean Standard Bible, which you can also find at berean.bible. Consider subscribing to this podcast to be a part of this daily effort to grow in familiarity with and love of God's holy word. Let's dive in for today. Hey y'all, Pastor Jeffrey here, joining you from Casa de Rickman. I was winding down at the end of the day, completely forgot about this. Can't believe it. Drove to Enid and back today. It's like a 3-hour drive each way. Went to do a funeral service for a friend. So it's been a good day. I got to honor my friend, but anyway, forgot some stuff. So we are going to do 5 more chapters of Judges today. I think we decided to let my daughter read it. I don't know if she's already started or not, but anyway, it's a pretty heavy book. I have no problem believing that this is real history. This is how humans really are. So anyway, with that in mind, let's go ahead and begin. Judges chapter 6. Again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, so he delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel because the Midianites, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites would plant their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other people of the east would come up and invade them, encamping against them as far as Gaza and destroying the produce of the land. They left Israel with no sustenance, neither sheep nor oxen nor donkeys. For the Midianites came with their livestock and their tents like a great swarm of locusts. They and their camels were innumerable, and they entered the land to ravage it. Israel was greatly impoverished by Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Now when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who told them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. I delivered you out of the hands of Egypt and all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You must not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But you did not obey me." Then the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and said, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." "Please, my lord," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonders of which our fathers told us, saying, Has not the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Am I not sending you?" "Please, my lord," Gideon replied, "how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house." "Surely I will be with you," the Lord replied, "and you will strike down all the Midianites as one man." Gideon answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, give me a sign that it is you speaking with me. Please do not depart from this place until I return to you. Let me bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will stay until you return." So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread and an ephah of flour. He placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and brought them out to present to him under the oak. And the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, Lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord extended the tip of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire flared from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Oh no, Lord God, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid, for you will not die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. On that very night the Lord said to Gideon, "Take your father's young bull and a second bull, 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold. And with the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down, take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city, he did it by night rather than in the daytime. When the men of the city got up in the morning, there was Baal's altar torn down, with the Asherah pole cut down beside it, and the second bull offered up on the newly built altar. "Who did this?" they said one to another. And after they had investigated thoroughly, they were told, "Gideon, son of Joash, did it." Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son. He must die, because he has torn down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Are you contending for Baal? Are you trying to save him? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal is a god, let him contend for himself with the one who has torn down the altar." So on that day Gideon was called Jerubbaal, that is to say, "Let Baal contend with him," because he had torn down Baal's altar. Then all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other people of the east gathered together, crossed over the Jordan, and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, who blew the ram's horn and rallied the Abiezrites behind him. Calling them to arms, Gideon sent messengers throughout Manasseh, as well as Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so that they came up to meet him. Then Gideon said to God, "If you are going to save Israel by my hand, as you have said, then behold, I will place a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece, and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to save Israel by my hand, as you have said." And that is what happened. When Gideon arose the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me one more test with the fleece. This time let it be dry and the ground covered with dew." And that night God did so. Only the fleece was dry, and dew covered the ground. Judges chapter 7. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the men with him camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many people for me to deliver Midian into their hands, lest Israel glorify themselves over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.' Now therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 of them turned back, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many people. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say to you, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go, but if I say, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." So Gideon brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel to drink." And the number of those who lapped the water with their hands to their mouths was 300 men. All the others knelt to drink. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men who lapped the water, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. But all the others are to go home." So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept 300 men who took charge of the provisions and ram's horns of the others. And the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. That night the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up and go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to do so, then go down to the camp with your servant Purah, and listen to what they are saying. Then your hands will be strengthened to attack the camp." So he went with Purah his servant to the outposts where armed men were guarding the camp. Now the Midianites, Amalekites, and all the other people of the east had settled in the valley like a swarm of locusts, and their camels were as countless as the sand on the seashore. And as Gideon arrived, a man was telling his friend about a dream. "Behold, I had a dream," he said, "and I saw a loaf of barley bread come tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent so hard that the tent overturned and collapsed." His friend replied, "This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has delivered Midian and the whole camp into his hand." When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Get up, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand." And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and gave each man a ram's horn in one hand and a large jar in the other containing a torch. "Watch me and do as I do," Gideon said. "When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our horns, then you are also to blow your horns from all around the camp and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon!'" Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after the changing of the guard. They blew their horns and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew their horns and shattered their jars. Holding the torches in their left hands and the horns in their right hands, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army fled, crying out as they ran. And when the 300 ram's horns sounded, the Lord set all the men in the camp against one another with their swords. The army fled to Beth-shittah toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel-meholah, near Tabbath. Then the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim to say, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth-barah." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters of Jordan as far as Beth-barah. They also captured Oreb and Zeeb, the 2 princes of Midian, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeeb at the winepress of Zeeb. So they pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Judges chapter 8. Then the men of Ephraim said to Gideon, "Why have you done this to us? Why did you fail to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they contended with him violently. But Gideon answered them, "Now what have I accomplished compared to you? Are not the gleanings of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has delivered Oreb and Zeeb, the 2 princes of Midian, into your hand. What was I able to do compared to you?" When he had said this, their anger against him subsided. Then Gideon and his 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it, exhausted yet still in pursuit. So Gideon said to the men of Succoth, "Please give my troops some bread, for they are exhausted, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the leaders of Succoth asked, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession, that we should give bread to your army?" "Very well," Gideon replied. "When the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with the thorns and briars of the wilderness." From there he went up to Penuel and asked the same from them, but the men of Penuel gave the same response as the men of Succoth. So Gideon told the men of Penuel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the people of the east. 120,000 swordsmen had already fallen. And Gideon went up by way of the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and he attacked their army, taking them by surprise. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, Gideon pursued and captured these two kings of Midian, routing their entire army. After this, Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle along the ascent of Heres. There he captured a young man of Succoth and interrogated him. The young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 leaders and elders of Succoth. And Gideon went to the men of Succoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, 'Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession, that we should give bread to your weary men?'" Then he took the elders of the city, and using the thorns and briars of the wilderness, he disciplined the men of Succoth. He also pulled down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Next, Gideon asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "Men like you," they answered, "each one resembling the son of a king." "They were my brothers," Gideon replied, "the sons of my mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." But the young man did not draw his sword. He was fearful because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Get up and kill us yourself, for as the man is, so is his strength." So Gideon got up and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments from the necks of their camels. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and grandson, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon replied, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord shall rule over you." Then he added, "Let me make a request of you, that each of you give me an earring from his plunder." For the enemies had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. "We will give them gladly," they replied. So they spread out a garment, and each man threw an earring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold earrings he had requested was 1,700 shekels, in addition to the crescent ornaments, the pendants, the purple garments of the kings of Midian, and the chains from the necks of their camels. From all this Gideon made an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his hometown. But soon all Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. In this way, Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. So the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. And he, Jerubbaal, son of Joash, returned home and settled down. Gideon had 70 sons of his own. Since he had many wives, his concubine, who dwelt in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Later, Gideon, son of Joash, died at a ripe old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And as soon as Gideon was dead, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves with the Baals, and they set up Baal-berith as their god. The Israelites failed to remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for Israel. Judges chapter 9. Now, Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers at Shechem and said to them and to all the clan of his mother, "Please ask all the leaders of Shechem, is it better for you that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or just one man? Remember that I am your own flesh and blood." And when his mother's brothers spoke all these words about him in the presence of all the leaders of Shechem, their hearts were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired some worthless and reckless men to follow him. He went to his father's house in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, survived because he hid himself. Then all the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the oak at the pillar in Shechem and proceeded to make Abimelech their king. When this was reported to Jotham, he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim, raised his voice, and cried out, "Listen to me, O leaders of Shechem, and may God listen to you. One day the trees set out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree replied, 'Should I stop giving my oil that honors both God and man to hold sway over the trees?' Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'Come and reign over us.' But the fig tree replied, 'Should I stop giving my sweetness and my good fruit to hold sway over the trees?' Then the trees said to the grapevine, 'Come and reign over us.' But the grapevine replied, 'Should I stop giving my wine that cheers both God and man to hold sway over the trees?' Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, 'Come and reign over us.' But the thorn bush replied, 'If you really are anointing me as king over you, come and find refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon.' Now if you have acted faithfully and honestly in making Abimelech king, if you have done well by Jerubbaal and his family, and if you have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you and risked his life to deliver you from the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on a single stone. And you have made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your brother. If you have acted faithfully and honestly toward Jerubbaal and his house this day, then may you rejoice in Abimelech, and he in you. But if not, may fire come from Abimelech and consume the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo, and may fire come from the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo and consume Abimelech." Then Jotham ran away, escaping to Beer, and he lived there for fear of his brother Abimelech. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel for 3 years, God sent a spirit of animosity between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and caused them to treat Abimelech deceitfully. In order that the crime against the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come to justice, and their blood be avenged on their brother Abimelech and on the leaders of Shechem who had helped him murder his brothers, the leaders of Shechem set up an ambush against Abimelech on the hilltops, and they robbed all who passed by them on the road. So this was reported to Abimelech. Meanwhile, Gaal, son of Ebed, came with his brothers and crossed into Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem put their confidence in him. And after they had gone out into the fields, gathered grapes from their vineyards, and trodden them, they held a festival, and went into the house of their God, and as they ate and drank, they cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? You are to serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. Why should we serve Abimelech. If only this people were under my authority, I would remove Abimelech. I would say to him, muster your army and come out. When Zebul, the governor of the city, heard the words of Gaal, son of Ebed, he burned with anger. So he covertly sent messengers to Abimelech to say, look, Gaal, son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem and are stirring up the city against you. Now then, tonight, you and the people with you are to come and lie in wait in the fields. And in the morning, at sunrise, get up and advance against the city. When Gaal and his men come out against you, do to them whatever you are able. So Abimelech and all his troops set out by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, went out and stood at the entrance of the city gate just as Abimelech and his men came out from their hiding places. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the mountains. But Zebul replied, the shadows of the mountains look like men to you. Then Gaal spoke up again, look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company is coming by way of the diviner's oak. Where is your gloating now? Zebul replied. You said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are these not the people you ridiculed? Go out now and fight them. So Gaal went out before the leaders of Shechem and fought against Abimelech. But Abimelech pursued him, and Gaal fled before him. And many Shechemites fell wounded all the way to the entrance of the gate. Abimelech stayed in Arumah, and Zebul drove Gaal and his brothers out of Shechem. The next day the people of Shechem went out into the fields, and this was reported to Abimelech. So he took his men, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the fields. When he saw the people coming out of the city, he rose up against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the companies with him rushed forward and took their stand at the entrance of the city gate. The other 2 companies rushed against all who were in the fields and struck them down. And all that day Abimelech fought against the city until he captured it and killed its people. Then he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. On hearing this, all the leaders in the tower of Shechem entered the inner chamber of the temple of El-Berith. And when Abimelech was told that all the leaders in the tower of Shechem were gathered there, he and all his men went up to Mount Zalmon. Abimelech took his axe in his hand and cut a branch from the trees, which he lifted to his shoulders, saying to his men, hurry and do what you have seen me do. So each man also cut his own branch and followed Abimelech. Then they piled the branches against the inner chamber and set it on fire above them, killing everyone in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women. Then Abimelech went to Thebez and camped against it and captured it. But there was a strong tower inside the city, and all the men, women, and leaders of the city fled there. They locked themselves in and went up to the roof of the tower. When Abimelech came to attack the tower, he approached its entrance to set it on fire, but a woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. He quickly called his armor-bearer, saying, draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed him. So Abimelech's armor-bearer ran his sword through him, and he died. And when the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they all went home. In this way God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father in murdering his 70 brothers. And God also brought all the wickedness of the men of Shechem back upon their own heads, so the curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came upon them. Judges 10. After the time of Abimelech, a man of Issachar, Tola, son of Puah, the son of Dodo, rose up to save Israel. He lived in Shamir, in the hill country of Ephraim. Tola judged Israel 23 years, and when he died, he was buried in Shamir. Tola was followed by Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, And they had 30 towns in the land of Gilead, which to this day are called Javoth, Havoth, Jair. When Jair died, he was buried in Kamon. And again the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. They served the Baals, the Ashtoreths, the gods of Aram, Sidon, and Moab, and the gods of the Ammonites and Philistines. Thus they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and Ammonites, who that very year harassed and oppressed the Israelites, and did so for 18 years to all the Israelites on the other side of the Jordan in Gilead, the land of the Amorites. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and the house of Ephraim, and Israel was in deep distress. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, saying, "We have sinned against you, for we have indeed forsaken our God and served the Baals." The Lord replied, "When the Egyptians, Amorites, Ammonites, Philistines, Sidonians, Amalekites, and Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, did I not save you from their hands? But you have forsaken me and served other gods, so I will no longer save you. Go and cry to the gods you have chosen. Let them save you in your time of trouble." "We have sinned," the Israelites said to the Lord. "Deal with us as you see fit, but please deliver us today." So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and he could no longer bear the misery of Israel. Then the Ammonites were called to arms and encamped in Gilead, and the Israelites assembled and camped at Mizpah. And the rulers of Gilead said to one another, "Whoever will launch the attack against the Ammonites will be the head of all who live in Gilead." All right, that's it for Judges. Now we just are going to do Psalm 43. Vindicate me, O God, and plead my case against an ungodly nation. Deliver me from deceitful and unjust men. For you are the God of my refuge. Why have you rejected me? Why must I walk in sorrow because of the enemy's oppression? Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy mountain and to the place where you dwell. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God, my greatest joy. I will praise you with the harp, O God, my God. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why the unease within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. The word of the Lord. That concludes our time together. I hope it's been a good time. A lot of good ancient history. A lot of people don't know the history of that Abimelech, technically the first king of Israel. Didn't work out real well for him, did it? And we'll come back to that. That story gets retold later on as a reference point as Israel gets more established. So anyway, we have several more chapters of Judges to do in the coming days. Remember, of course, we're not doing this tomorrow. That's the day to go to worship with your spiritual family. So I hope you do that, and I'll see you the day after. All right, blessings.